Clementine Hunter?
Clementine Hunter was a unique person in that she was a folk artist. I'm getting feedback.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Clementine Hunter was a unique person in that not only was she an artist, but she was also a cultural historian, documenting a way of life on a rural southern plantation that has basically disappeared in the latter part of the 20th century.
Perfect. Now, and also describe the kind of person she was.
Clementine Hunter was a unique person in that she considered her art to be natural. It was never an effort. In other words, in order for her to paint a picture, it had to be in her head. I tried many times to have her paint a picture of an automobile for a friend of mine that had a car dealership. She could never do it. She said, "It didn't come in my head. It won't come in my head." So it was a process, a natural process for her to paint. At times, she would say, "I'm not going to paint anymore. I'm tired." But within a day or two, she'd be painting again. There was something inside her that caused this painting to occur. I'm particularly, perplexed by the fact that many of her paintings are very traditional, the scenes of plantation life. However, there are pictures that are these abstracts and other subjects that just came out of her head. So besides thinking about something in her head, her mind also generated ideas for paintings.
Why do you think she was so driven to paint?
I believe the drive to paint came from some inner feeling. There's a feeling in people that want to sing or dance or act. I think this same feeling was in Clementine Hunter. And it's odd to think that someone who really had no access to the tools, the paints, the brushes, and such a late time in her life did get access to them, and all of a sudden it became natural.
How were her creative abilities manifest before she started painting, or were they? And if they were, in what way?
What little we know about her earlier period of time, she worked very hard on the plantation, as well as taking care of two husbands, sickness in the family of children. However, undoubtedly she sewed. She did quilts. She did sewing before she started painting. And I understand that she was a very good cook, so there's a certain degree, certainly creativity in the kitchen.
Absolutely. What does she and her creative ability represent?
I think her creative ability represents two aspects. One is a style of art that is naive and unique, her perspective on painting, certainly. But secondly, I think the aspect of her career and her life is that she has been able to capture for future generations scenes from the first half of this 20th century that probably will never be repeated. Such things as wash days, when they actually used the big kettles to wash, when they used the cotton gins, when they took the cotton in wagons. All of the typical southern plantation scenes of the first part of this century, before mechanization came to agriculture.
Okay. Oh, you just said something that made me... Oh, how would you call her naive? What do you mean by that?
Naive is a term meaning self-taught. There is a style of painting primitive. You can teach someone to paint primitively. Naive is self-taught. It is not, it's an individual creation, a self-created entity.
She gave God credit, or I should say who, when she was talking about where her talent came from and her inspiration or her gift. She called it a gift. Who endowed her with that gift? Who did she give credit to?
Clementine was a big believer in God. Now, we always were a little bit confused because she wore St. Christopher's medal and she was buried to the Catholic Church, but she also said she liked the Baptist Church because she liked the singing better. So she was truly an ecumenical person, and I guess in a way that's the true God, the God for everyone and not necessarily through one particular denomination.
So how did she give credit to God for her gift?
Her entire painting career she attributed to God. She said God gave her this gift to paint. She also felt like that God was an inspiration to her. Probably a painting that comes to mind that would be an ideal depiction of this would be when her son Frenchie died. And after he died, 3 or 4 days later, she painted 3 pictures of Frenchie going to heaven. A cemetery scene with this body coming out of the ground and a hole spinning in the sky, that Frenchie was going to heaven. Clementine said she could never cry. In her whole life, she never could, issue tears. She said, if I could have cried, I would have cried when my mother died. So in the situation with the Frenchie painting, that was her emotional catharsis, was the painting of Frenchie going to heaven.
Great. We did shoot Dee Dee's Frenchie going to heaven.
Okay, so you got the picture.
Yeah, so that's great. Now, some of these questions I'm going to ask you, you've already answered, but I want you to now speak specifically to that. What is the major contribution Clementine has made with her art?
Clementine's artwork has depicted a way of life on the rural southern plantation in the first half of the 20th century that has basically disappeared. Not only is she credited as being an artist, but I see her role as a cultural historian, documenting a way of life of the rural southern Afro-American population.
Also, in what ways has she personalized her subject matter?
The personalization of Clementine's painting is quite obvious. For example, on Mondays at the plantation was always wash day. So a wash day painting is a common scene where they would literally boil the clothes in a large kettle or urn outside and then hang them up. Of course, the cotton picking scenes where, her story goes that the favorite time of her life was the time she spent picking cotton. I could not imagine anything worse than picking cotton. But she said at that time, when she was young, they would take the babies and leave them at the end of the rows, and there would be a lot of singing and, music going through the fields, which is certainly, dramatically depicted in her paintings. Many paintings of Clementine's depict scenes related to cotton. But in the same vein, her paintings also reflect joy, the joy of religion, the joy of the church, the baptizing, of course, the sadness too, the wake, the funeral. There's the christening painting. These are all, and the gods. She has the Black Jesus painting. These are all the religious aspects. But I think you also have to talk about the personalization of Clementine Hunter's artwork. There's also scenes of play. There is the honky tonk, the Saturday night at the honky tonk. There's the fish fry. And Clementine always said she loved to fish. I never saw her fish, but she always said she loved to fish. And there's also then the still lifes. And I think personally that the flowers capture some of the true beauty of her work. And the beauty in life have been captured by those flower paintings.
Great, great. What seemed to be her favorite themes, and why did she repeat them over and over?
The favorite themes in Clementine's paintings were scenes very personal to her, and I would say they were scenes of work. Probably her most popular painting was the Wash Day. Excuse me, let me start over. Probably the most popular painting of Clementine's were the scenes of work at the plantation. The cotton picking was probably the most popular. The Wash Day. The scenes that were so intimate and close to her lives. Those paintings seem to be the ones she enjoyed doing the most.
Do you remember any of her comments about how she felt about working? Or did she ever talk to you about that?
When you say work, you mean painting or working on the plantation?
No, well, just working. I mean, or always being busy.
Oh yes.
Industrious.
Clementine was always a person that was doing something. A favorite story that comes to mind would be, in the early 70s, late 60s, Clementine was one of the first people out in the country that had a freezer. And she would sell popsicles, her homemade version. She would freeze Kool-Aid with a stick in it. And she could be out in the front yard or in the house painting a picture. She would stop and go sell a popsicle for a nickel. That's what she sold them to the kids in the community for. There was no store nearby. So, she was always doing something. If it weren't painting, it'd be doing something else. And of course, her works include not only paintings on boards and canvas materials, but the objects, the bottles, anything she could hold in her hands. She never used an easel. I never saw a time when she ever used an easel. She would prop up, hold in her hand, some way or another, but never used an easel. Then, of course, she sewed and she cooked. She was quite a cook. Even up until her 90s, she would be in the kitchen cooking. I've been out there many times when she would be cooking.
What'd she cook?
She would cook country foods. For a while, the doctor used to discourage her from frying foods and using fat and things. And finally, when she got to be about 90 years old, the doctor said, you know, you live this long, just go ahead and do what you want to do. It's not going to hurt you. So Clementine ate and drank whatever she liked. One of her favorite little perks was wine. She loved red wine, but the prerequisite was it couldn't have a cork in the bottle because she couldn't get the cork out of with the corkscrew. So her request always was for red wine with a screw top so she could open it, and she would dilute it with water and drink it before she went to bed at night. So one of her favorite little gifts you could take her was red wine with a screw top.
That's great. Where did the abstracts come from?
The abstracts paintings that Clementine did really fall into two categories. One category, and this occurred in the early 50s, was influenced by James Register. He did some ideas. He actually took some pieces of paper, cut them out, and glued them on boards or something like that, and then Clementine painted them. So in other words, it was sort of a joint effort. James Register inspiration, Clementine painting. But
Do you know why he did that?
he was trying to open her up to new avenues of subject matter. She at that time was primarily painting the scenes of plantation life. He was interested in trying her to get her interested in other areas. The other abstracts, though, the later ones, came what I call post-James Register, after the period of influence of James Register. These abstracts were completely from the inside of Clementine, and some of them are almost amazing in that the color tonations, and there are some indications of African themes and subjects. And Clementine had no relevance. She did not understand Africa. Everything was just over the waters, and that was a foreign country. So she had no geographical delineation of Africa. But the influence of African traits can certainly be seen in some of these later abstracts, which really are really a perplexing thing to me.
Okay.
You're doing great. I knew you would. You've done this 100 times.
I may be using my hands too much, though.
Well, I don't know. To me, it animates an otherwise. Okay. How did Clementine describe her abstracts?
The best recollection of how Clementine would describe her abstract was, "It hurts my head." I tried to get her to explain to me when I got my first couple out there, and she had no explanation. She would just say, I tried to get her to paint more because they were so wonderful, I thought, and she said, "It hurts my head." So that was the general answer on the abstracts.
Took a lot of thinking.
Yes, and I think what she meant also was the fact that to get those colors, that she had to take a very careful eye to it. It was unlike painting inside a person or a building because there was tonation involved, which involved thinking and stirring colors up to get them to tonate, to go through a color.
How did she paint? What was the process that she used?
In painting, the artist would first of all take a board, a surface material. She would prime it, usually put a background color on it, white or whatever color. Then she would literally take a pencil and draw the picture. Once the picture was drawn, then she would fill in the lines with paint. And that's how all of her paintings are done. One way of determining authenticity of a painting is in most every painting you can look somewhere and you'll find a pencil mark somewhere where you can see the edge where she didn't quite fill it in.
Tell me, you mentioned this a while ago, but how did she paint?
She always painted with the painting in her lap or holding it. She never used an easel. She would use a piece of board, plywood, some material, and she would just literally squirt the paint out of the tube on the board. Then she would take her brush, and if she wanted to mix a color, she would mix it on that board. Then she would apply the paint to the board, but it was always done in her lap. And in the later years, you could see more obviously fingerprints where her fingers weren't clean. In the earlier years, she kept her fingers cleaner, but on the later paintings, there were marks on the back where her fingerprints, where you could see her holding the board. She would also paint objects like bottles and stuff she could hold in her hand. She never used an easel.
Okay.
Okay, where did she paint?
For many years, Clementine always painted in the little cabin across the road from Melrose. And in the dining room, I guess you'd call it, there was a pot-bellied stove, a wood stove, and she would fill it full of wood and sit there and paint. And I have been out there days in the spring and the fall when it was, shall we say, warm outside, and Clementine had a fire going. I can remember once interview with a television station, and it was not a particularly cold day, and they brought in lots of lights, and we were all just, she had a fire going. We were just drenching, wet with perspiration, and Clementine was just as comfortable and toasty sitting there painting. A favorite story of mine about Clementine at the little house at Melrose was one day I was driving out to see her, and there was a car stopped in front of her house, and just as I was about to stop, the car pulled on by, and Clementine had her head in the window talking to them. And when I got there, I asked Clementine, who was that? What were they doing? And she said, oh, they wanted to know where Clementine Hunter lived, and I told him just up the road a piece. She valued highly her privacy. She liked people to come see her, but she liked people she knew, and she just didn't like strangers too much. We went through an episode when we got her a private telephone line. Her telephone number was listed for many years, and people would start calling her. And we finally got her an unlisted number, which allowed her to have not having phone calls all the time, because she'd sleep late in the morning. She was not an early riser, and people would call. She was 9:30, 10 o'clock when Clementine was up. So the private line helped a lot, and her privacy was a very special thing to her.
On that theme, did she have any idea how talented she was and how far-reaching were her works?
I don't think she had. I don't think Clementine Hunter had any idea of the importance or the popularity of her paintings. And furthermore, I don't think she cared. She painted the pictures, she sold the paintings, and to her, that was the end of it. She cared very little about the fame and recognition that came with her work. In fact, I think she considered it all to be a nuisance. It interfered with her ability to paint. She never particularly cared for interviews. She would not very seldom would she ever make a public appearance, and it was always with basically a lot of nudging and encouraging for us to get her to make an appearance somewhere.
Towards the end, now Dee Dee talked about her honorary doctorate and how she responded to that. Towards the end, did she seem somewhat aware, or I guess how would you convince her to participate in these things that honored her?
It's going to go into the answer. Publicity about her knowing about.
Yes.
Toward the end of her life, she realized that she had gained, I think, attention, but it didn't mean anything to her if someone came from New York to see her or if they came from Natchitoches 5 miles away. There was no prestige to her. She was a very simple person, which I think was wonderful, but name and fame and stuff didn't particularly pay any attention to her. She would just as soon be left alone to be painting.
Well, again, following that, tell me the Jimmy Carter story.
The story goes that President Carter, there was going to be, excuse me, let me start over. The story goes that each year in February, a group of Louisiana lobbyists and the congressional delegation puts on a Mardi Gras ball in Washington. In conjunction with that ball during the Carter administration, there was an exhibit of her paintings at a hotel in Washington. At that time, the Democratic congressional delegation got President Carter to issue an invitation for her to come to Washington to come to the opening of the show and to come to the White House. And her immediate retort was, if he wants to see me, he can come down here. She didn't travel. We do not think in Clementine Hunter's life she ever traveled further than Shreveport and maybe Baton Rouge, which would be a total geographical distance of about 150 miles either direction of her home. And those trips were probably few and far between.
Describe Clementine's sense of humor.
Clementine Hunter, I shouldn't say all. I shouldn't all start off with Clementine Hunter. Her sense of humor was delightful and charming. It had a subtlety to it that made it the humor of a person who is mentally alert and quite sharp. The episodes with her paintings, for example, she would show the kid falling out of the tree in the pecan picking scene. I oftentimes wonder about Mary going to the manger to have the baby Jesus, the obviously pregnant mother, Holy Mother. A lot of her paintings have whimsy in them. There is this large rooster, or she called it the gooster, pulling the cart. I guess what I'm saying is her paintings had humor in them, but also her life depicted wit and charm, and she would have little jokes and tell stories. She was quite a raconteur, and she could tell stories quite well.
But do you remember
That's
any?
what I'm trying to think. That's
good
why I'm
ones?
trying to think of a story to tell you.
You
Right?
just opened yourself.
Well, we'll come back to that. We'll think about that in a minute. We'll
Okay.
come back to the stories.
How did Clementine get her painting supplies, and what sort of surfaces did she paint on?
Throughout her career, there was always someone there that was able to get her boards and the paint supplies. It started off with Francois Mignon and James Register. Particularly James Register would send them to Francois in the mail. Francois would take them to Clementine. Later on then, I was one of many that inherited that role. It became quite difficult for her after a while because she preferred to paint on Upson board or masonite that comes in 4x8 sheets. Well, you'd have to find a lumber yard that was agreeable to cut those things into these paintings. Most of her boards came out to be 18 by 24. It became more and more difficult to find someone that would cut those boards. So finally, and it was also for the betterment of her, the preservation of her work, we convinced her to use canvas board. And the masonite had a particular problem with moisture. It would have a problem with wanting to warp. So the canvas, but she didn't like canvas. And the reason why she didn't like canvas was it was not a smooth surface to mark the pencil on. The masonite had a smooth surface and she could draw her pictures much easier. The canvas with the roughness to it made it more difficult to draw. Let me say something else. She always painted with oil. She would never paint with acrylics because this method she used of squirting the paint out on this board and mixing around on there and coming back to it the next day and stuff, the acrylics would dry. The oils would be her preference because they would not dry. And it also became a known fact that if you wanted to get Clementine to paint something, you'd take her paint. She would consume unbelievable amounts of white paint. Her consumption of white paint sometimes was just almost beyond belief how much white paint she actually used.
What did she use it for?
Well, she used it a lot for her buildings, and she used it in the background. She would put this background paint would be white to paint on. But she had, and the cotton, for example, her cotton picking paintings, that cotton globbed on the bushes there took a lot of white paint. She was a big consumer of white paint.
Clementine painted Saturday night and Sunday morning. And I want you to use that statement, but what does that tell us about? What was she telling us about life along Cane River? And even about herself?
The themes of her paintings from Saturday night to Sunday morning, in other words, from the honky-tonk to the church, depicted, I guess, the cycle of life that she lived.
Can we do that one more time? I'm sorry.
That's fine.
That was my fault. I was assuming you changed your thing. Okay, go ahead.
The paintings from Saturday night to Sunday morning, from the honky-tonk to the church scenes, depict a great deal about her life. The fact that she knew how to have a good time, but she also was a religious person. You know, her paintings depicted life, the whole cycle of life, the work, the play, the religion. In other words, her paintings were her life, with the few exceptions of the abstracts, and even the still lifes would fit into the cycle of life. Her paintings were her life. They told every aspect of it, the joy, the sorrow, the beauty, the work, the sweat. Her whole life was told in those paintings.
Perfect. I love the fact that, I mean, Saturday night whooping it up and Sunday morning they're in the church.
Let me make another comment about something that you might can use later.
Okay.
I thought about something earlier I didn't kind of quite elaborate on. The paintings of Clementine Hunter depicted a style of life that changed dramatically after the Second World War. After World War II, mechanization came to agriculture, which greatly reduced the number of jobs on the plantation. Many of the people who worked on the plantation migrated north to the large urban areas looking for jobs. So whenever the jobs played out because of mechanization, that's what caused the change of life to occur. And Clementine's prime time for her life was pre-World War II. So her paintings depict the style of the African American living on a southern plantation before the Second World War. And it is documented from the role of an insider. Very few of these people could write, had access to photography, could paint. Clementine was a rare person in that she documented a disappearing way of life from the perspective of an insider, of a participant.
But she was just, I mean, she had no idea that she was being a historian.
Oh, absolutely not. She had no idea that she was a historian or a cultural historian. She just painted what she knew. And it just happened to be that her career in painting began at that transition point in the economy of our nation, because World War II was about the time she started painting.
What do you think is so extraordinary about her circumstances?
The most extraordinary aspect of her life was the fact that without education, she accomplished this great degree of success. You know, there's a great deal of emphasis in our society put upon education, but if you look at Clementine Hunter, you might want to question that. Uneducated, no opportunities, and yet she gained a lasting recognition. Not only that, but her works are going to tell a story that all of the people in this community who could write, paint, photograph will never have done. Clementine's stories in paint will be last presumably forever, as long as mankind can maintain archives and museums.
I mean, also within that extraordinary life were key relationships.
Interestingly, Clementine's life had a series of relationships, and it was rather extraordinary. Early on, there was Francois and James Register, and I presume Miss Cammie Henry. But then, as they passed from the scene, I became involved, Dee Dee Bailey, Ann Britton, and other people as well. There always seemed to be, and I don't want to use the term patron at all, there were always friends of Clementine's that were there to participate, not only to bring her boards and paint, but to participate in this joy of her painting. You know, it was fun to go out to Clementine's and talk to her and watch her paint. She would paint sometime while you were there. And it was always interesting to see this happen, to see this process of, I'm not sure it was discovery, but this process of putting the paint on the board in her own unique style.
When did you first meet her? What were the circumstances, and what were those first impressions?
Just
a minute.
The clock striking.
Because we may pick it up.
I first met Clementine Hunter on a memorable afternoon. Ora Williams was an English teacher at the University in Natchitoches at Northwestern State, and I was her student worker. And she had told me about Melrose, Francois, Clementine, and offered one afternoon to take me out there. And my first trip to Clementine's house was with Ora Williams, and Ora Williams should also be included in a group of people that went to Clementine's over the years and was longtime friends of hers.
And what was your first impression when you met Clementine?
My first impression upon meeting Clementine was rather surprising in that she was so small. I don't know what I fully expected, but she was extraordinarily petite. She was a very small person, very black-skinned, and always wore a wig. I never saw her until the very last 2 weeks of her life that she did not have on a wig. She always wore a wig. And fond memories of those days. That I can remember the first trip to Clementine's.
How did she respond to you?
Well, Clementine referred to me as her white son. That was an accolade that I gained probably for the last 20 years of her life. And I was about the only person that could get her to make public appearances and stuff. I could go out there and generally, if anyone could, I could talk her into doing something, to coming to a function or something. But I wasn't always successful at it by any means. But I had usually the most luck out of getting her to do things.
And why do you think she responded to you?
I think I had a very special relationship with Clementine, and I hope Clementine had that very special relationship with me. And I think that was the result of it. We get each other to do things, and um, it was very special.
How was the friendship nurtured?
The friendship was nurtured because I would help Clementine with get things. One time someone had told her, it just comes to my mind, that peanut oil would help her arthritis. So we went and found, this was before peanut oil became readily available in the markets. I was always out looking for boards and paints and all these other sundry things. But in return, she would sometimes paint me special pictures. Pictures that they weren't the traditional paintings. I thought of something I didn't say a while ago that you asked me a question about. Clementine's paintings were memory paintings, and by being memory paintings, there were a relatively limited number of scenes she painted. For example, you consider an opera singer to have a repertoire of performances. Clementine had this repertoire of paintings she did. Basically, they were the same scenes over and over. The fishing, the wash day, the hunting, the cotton picking, etc., the ginning. It was rare that she went out and painted a picture outside this normal memory painting. These abstracts are an example. But traditionally, Clementine's paintings, with the exception of an occasion when there was some impetus, like, for example, Frenchie dying, or once there was snow on Cane River and she painted a group of paintings with snow. We all got a snow painting. Fortunately, I got the one with the snow falling on the river rather than the snowman. Her snowman was not a memorable snowman. Once I arranged for her to get an unlisted telephone number, when we got an episode when she needed a private telephone. In return for that, I got a painting of Clementine getting an unlisted number. It's a picture of the telephone people out at her house putting phones and wires and everything around the house. So occasionally there would be something that would cause her to paint something special for me. An example is a collage she did for her 100th birthday. We had the big 100th birthday party. Many photographs were taken. Some people took her pictures. Then a week or two later, she had for me a painting that had the pictures glued down to it, and then she painted around it. So I actually think she tried to experiment some with things for me, knowing that I liked her to be, exciting and do different things.
That's great. What do you most admire in her?
I would most admire in Clementine her ability, her success in overcoming unbelievable odds. The fact that she was uneducated, poor, lived in one of the most rural areas of this country, and yet she managed to do something that has brought national and international acclaim to her. That's rather remarkable.
It is. I want you to say that again without your hand.
Okay, okay.
That was a great statement.
I'm not sure I can.
Well, just what do you most admire in Clementine?
I most admire in Clementine Hunter the fact that someone who was uneducated, poor, from one of the most remote and rural areas of this entire nation, managed to gain national and international acclaim. She was a remarkable person, and it was an act that she did without really, she tried real hard, but it happened without her pushing. She was not that aggressive person out there selling her works, making public appearances, hyping her work. It was a remarkable feat.
When you say remarkable, what character traits do you think about that helped her success?
The character trait probably that helped her success the most was just hard work. She always wanted to do something. She never wanted to stop. She used to always say that she wouldn't paint on Sunday. That was the Lord's Day. Well, after a while we found her painting on Sunday. I'm not sure if she didn't know if it was Sunday or what, but she'd sneak and paint on Sunday because it was a natural thing to do, I think. But it was work. She was a person that actually loved work, you know. She didn't really consider this painting. She considered it work, but not work that she really enjoyed, like the cotton picking, which she always said was a favorite thing she did. Her life had three definable areas in it. One was working as a field hand, picking cotton. One as a cook at Melrose, where she was a household servant, and then the career of painting. So there were three very distinct and definable periods in her life. And fortunately, that last period, the painting period, worked upon the riches of those other two the experiences of those other two eras to be a source of the material that she painted.
How do you think she is an inspiration to a younger generation now?
Clementine Hunter could certainly be an inspiration, not only to young African Americans, but all anyone in the world, because she was someone that was born poor, uneducated, but yet has managed to capture for posterity something that has disappeared. She's a historian. She's a person like the other great painters that captured important points of time in history, something that has a lasting influence, yet she did it without really any advantages. It's a story that one could think about as an inspiration.
Absolutely. Let's see, what do you personally like about Clementine's paintings?
I personally like about Clementine Hunter's paintings the color, the brightness of them. And I see in most of them a story. Every painting I have has a story to it. And those stories make them richer to me probably than a person walking through a gallery just looking at a cotton or a wedding or a funeral. Because somewhere in there I've heard a story from her about the painting. So the paintings have a meaning to me besides just seeing the colors and the pictures on the wall. They're the stories that go with the paintings.
Which we will now talk about.
Okay.
You can go ahead and turn it off.
Okay.
Fruits and number 59. Fruits and Vegetables of the Plantation is a very special painting because it was done for my house. When I first built my house, the color scheme was in the 1970s was orange, which was a hot color. Clementine came out to my house for a visit the first time I built it, and then she went back home and painted that picture for my house. Now, if you'll look on the picture carefully, you'll see there's some recognizable tomatoes and an eggplant. But then if you started asking her, what is this or what is that, she said, I just made that up to make it look good.
That's great. You can just hold that in your lap because I can't see it.
69, Self-Portrait. The Reader's Digest magazine did a story on Clementine, I believe in 1976. The digest had people wanting to write letters to her. They used my address, and we received all kinds of letters. One of the items that we received was a pencil sketch from the photograph. I took it to Clementine, and the next time I was out, Clementine had taken her brushes and painted the pencil sketch. So that's what the self-portrait is. It's Clementine's painting of someone's pencil drawing. Number 75, It Hurts My Head. This is one of my all-time favorites. This painting is one of the abstracts, and it's one that she did for me, and it's a very special painting. The color, if you look at this carefully, you can see how the color, the tonation of the colors go from subtle to bright, back to subtle, to very soft colors. And then in the middle is the figure that's hidden in those colors. Quite a feat, I think, if you'll study this painting carefully, to see the colors and the shapes that she utilizes in this painting. I'm going to jump around a little bit.
Okay.
Number 81, The sick old man in the half-teacher bed was one that was done very late in her career. This was done when she was about 98, 99 years old. And it was something she had never painted before. And all of a sudden, I went out there one day and I said, "What is this?" She said, "It's the sick old man in the half-teacher bed."
Where did it come from?
Oh no, she just started painting. Oh, this is a good one. Number 86, the Christmas wreath. This painting has a very special story for her. In the early 1980s, I got the idea that I would have Clementine paint small little flower Christmas wreaths for all my friends for a Christmas present. I bought 24 pieces of canvas material, took them out there in July or something, and said, you know, at your leisure, paint me some wreaths, and I want to give them for Christmas presents. She said, okay. She agreed to do it for me. Well, about October, she said they were ready, and I went out there, and when I got there, I found out that the only wreath Clementine had ever known was a funeral wreath. So they came out to be black and orange and blues and pinks and yellows and greens. Only one came out in the traditional Christmas colors of red and green. So to be fair, I decided I would keep the red and green one, and I would give all my friends the odd colored ones, the funeral wreaths.
I love that. What do you need? Okay, go ahead.
Let me talk about the Melrose Plantation painting, because I don't know what y'all have, but you might could do something with the paintings versus what they look like in reality. And
No, that would be great.
okay.
Okay.
Number 77, Melrose Plantation. This painting captures the three major buildings at Melrose. The big house, built in the 1830s, and then the two African structures, the African house and the yucca house. You say something else about it, or
Yeah, say
Okay.
a little bit more.
The African house is the building where the murals are housed upstairs on the second floor. This was originally used as a provision storage place where there were no steps going up to it. It was in order to prevent theft. They would put boards out front and roll provisions upstairs and store stuff up there secured. The downstairs was used as a slave jail. The bars are still in the windows from that time. So the building has had a unique place in American architectural history, being constructed by African American freed slaves, and now the upstairs is used as a place for one of the great murals depicting Southern plantation life of African Americans. So this building, the African house depicted here, is truly a treasure of African American history in this country.
Why don't you say something about the murals, how they came about?
Credit for the murals goes to Francois Mignon. He got the idea of painting them upstairs. He had some of the men on the plantation cut the boards, the masonite boards for the murals, and they were done in sections. They were taken to her house and she painted them, and then they were brought over there and put up. We found whenever a curation project and conservation project was done on them that they were done in 1955, and you might notice on some of the murals there are some streaks, and what happened was when the painting was still wet, Francois got some kids on the plantation to, quote, protect them by putting varnish on them. And the varnish was not evenly applied, it streaked. And furthermore, it not only streaked, it got inside the paint. When the conservators were here, they said that, you know, in most instances, if the painting is properly dried, you can take the varnish layer off. But the varnish here, being applied with the wet paint, became a part of it, and there was no way to protect it. So the varnish is now a part of the total painting. The murals in the African house are truly a treasure of art in America. They are a comprehensive scene of plantation life circa 1930s in the rural South. I don't think anyone else from the role of an insider has ever been able to capture as complete a scenes of life in the South as those murals do in the African house.
Any idiosyncrasies of Clementine's that we see in the murals?
The murals depict basically a combination of many of her paintings. There's the wash day, there's the funeral, there's the cotton hoeing, there is the Saturday night at the honky tonk, there's the baptizing. They are the stories of her life. And of course, there's some whimsy. There is the first airplane that came out there. There was a picture flying around in the sky. And then the mural that captures Melrose Plantation shows some of the people. There was a photographer that came up from New Orleans every year. She is depicted taking pictures. Clementine says she depicts herself painting pictures there in the front. So there's some very personal touches there to the murals, but they are overall a major resource in showing plantation life in America in the first half of the century.
Fabulous. Okay, now we can go.
Number 74, Ladies in Calico. This depicts the annual tour of homes in Natchitoches. Every year, the second weekend in October, the old plantation homes are open. Some of them are open daily, but they all open up that one weekend. It's tour time. And they all wear, the ladies who have long calico dresses. And Clementine is depicting the ladies wearing their calico dresses at Melrose Plantation during the tour. So it's tour time at Melrose when the ladies come out in their calico dresses.
But what was, I guess, seeing all those women in calico dresses, in that particular, they're all black, right?
Yes. The women depicted in this painting are black. However, that one of the few times when she did paint any white people was occasionally she would paint some of the women in calico in white. An honest opinion of mine is I don't think Clementine was ever able to capture the tonation for white skin correctly. She could never get the paint mixed right because white paint was not right for white people. So I think one reason why paintings like this had the black, because traditionally the people in the tour have been white women. Now there are more African American women and other minorities participating, but whenever in the 50s and the 60s when the tour started, it was primarily white women. Because I believe she wasn't able to get the white skin correct.
Because, I mean, I've read and been told that she didn't particularly like to paint white folks. So.
I don't think she'd like to paint white people because I don't think she'd get the color of the skin correct. It's because white paint does not work for white people. It needs to be flesh color. And that's something that she had trouble blending and mixing to make it come out correctly. Once I saw a painting Clementine repaired. Someone had gotten a painting damaged, and it was the sky, and part of they had been broken, and they had put it back together and brought it to her to mend. And oh my goodness, she did not do repair work well because she could not get the colors the same. So where the tear was, the bend, there was a color blue that was just all it did. Instead of hide, it was accentuate the mark of the damage. She was not good at repair work. Her strong forte was originality, not copy work. She did not do restoration or conservation. The black pot, number 89. This is a special object for me because when I built my house in 1974, there was a housewarming. That's the first time she came to my house. And my friend Dee Dee Bailey and Clementine got together and decided they'd bring me a present. Dee Dee got the black pot and Clementine painted it. And the original intention of it was to use it for a vase, but I decided that any flowers you'd put in it was distract from the colors and the things, so it just stands alone now. It's a very special piece because two close friends of mine gave it to me on a special occasion. I'm going to talk about the objects. The objects as a group represent things in her life. She dipped snuff. All the time I knew her, she dipped snuff. And those little brown bottles were the type of Garrett snuff bottles that she used. She would clean them and then paint them. The nightmare of the snuff bottles was getting them to dry. Oil paint does not dry well on snuff bottles. Anywhere, it could be 6 months to a year before those things would dry. But you'll notice here these other objects here collected. The plastic milk jug. She bought milk, the grocery, and she painted pictures on the milk jug. It became almost whatever was in her life. Just like the experiences, the objects became things that she painted. Number 100, the watermelon slice. A friend in Baton Rouge collects watermelon slice paintings. I mean, just all kinds of objects and arts painted with watermelon slice. Well, he asked me if he got a piece of plywood cut that shape, could I try to get her to paint a watermelon slice? Well, we did it, and she not only painted it well, she liked painting it. So we got her started painting. What he would have the boards cut in Baton Rouge sent to me, and then we would have her paint them. Because she liked to hold things, and it was a perfect size to hold the painting. So that's how the watermelon slice paintings began. Number 101, the whiskey jar. This one's kind of fun because she painted jars and bottles all through her late career. But in this one, when I went out there to get it, there were 3 paintbrushes stuck down in the top of it. And I said, what is it? She said, they just need to be there. So that's why the 3 paintbrushes are stuck in the top of the whiskey bottle.
Oh, that's great.
After she started painting small objects, we then, of course, got involved in the fact that we'd take her things to paint on, like the keychain or the little recipe box. And originally, when these things were done in the 60s and the 70s, we used them as gifts, but of course we didn't realize at that time what valuable gifts we were giving people. But she didn't mind painting small things. Now, she did not like to paint like small figures on something, but she didn't mind painting a flower or something on a box or a keychain. The wine bottle, I'll talk about number 91. This green wine bottle was one that, again, you can see is a type that she had a screw top on it. You can see where the cap screwed on it, and it was one that she drank the wine out of and washed the bottle and painted the flowers on it.
That's great.
I want to talk about number 85, the cotton picking. This cotton picking is special as another example of her documenting the lifestyles. Back before that, all the pesticides and herbicides and everything to kill the weeds and everything, they had geese that were in the cotton fields, and geese eat grass, I understand. And they would have the fields fenced in, and they'd have geese. Well, here Clementine depicts geese in the fields eating the grass. Now, this is something that has truly disappeared from the American scene, is geese in the cotton fields. And she has captured this for her paintings for the future. The nativity scene, number 83. The nativity scene is rather fun because, of course, you have the 3 wise men, you have the manger, and you have Mary and the baby Jesus. Notice Mary sitting under that great big tree, that green thing. Well, Clementine had no concept of the Middle East. And to her, the most shady place at Melrose was under the banana trees with the great big leaves. So here she has Mary sitting under the banana tree with the baby Jesus. And the 3 wise men are bringing gifts. Now, Clementine, I'm not sure, understood frankincense and myrrh. Probably she understood gold. But the story goes that one of those people one of the wise men is bringing a cake wrapped in cellophane. One is bringing a box of chocolate. And the other one looks like I call it a pineapple. And Clementine did say that it was always a special thing in the holidays, at Christmas time, they would have pineapples. So that's probably it was a special treat. She was trying to depict some type of special gifts being brought to the manger. So there is the nativity scene and the story that she told with it.
Great.
Number 71, Teenagers on the Cane River. This was in the era of the 1970s with the Afro hairstyles. And to my knowledge, that's the only one she ever painted like that. It's just 2 teenagers, Afro-American style, as Clementine saw them in the 1970s.
I thought that was so funny.
A very unusual one. Number 73, Pecan Threshing. This is, along with the cotton picking, probably her most popular painting. And you'll notice there's the kid in the tree shaking the limbs, there are the pecans falling, and then there are the people on the ground picking up the pecans. Melrose Plantation, in addition to being cotton, is also a large producer of pecans. In fact, I think today it's the largest pecan producing place in Louisiana. So the pecans have had an integral part of Melrose's history as well as cotton. And the Clementine picked up pecans And up until the very last years of her life, every fall she would always pick me out a little bag of pecans. And it was always a special treat to get my Clementine pecans, because the Melrose pecans were always big pecans, and we always had this deep feeling that those kids had stolen the pecans from the plantation and brought them to Clementine. So they were always extra special pecans, the pecans from Clementine. I'm going to talk about a group of paintings, number 63, 64, 65, and 101. I don't know what the number of it is. It's another one of these little long, narrow ones.
Oh, okay.
There are four little long, narrow ones
Mhm,
that depict scenes on going to number 76. These four paintings depict the scenes of cotton life. It depicts the women out in the fields hoeing. By the way, traditionally in all her paintings they show women working in the fields. Very seldom does she show men picking the cotton. Now she shows men in the next one driving the wagon to the gin. Then you see the gin scene. So this is part of a mini series of murals. You capture the life story of cotton, from the hoeing to the hauling to the ginning, in these four small paintings that comprise the story of cotton on the plantation. Many of her paintings feature women in dominant or predominant roles. And there's some analysis of the matriarchal society out on the Cane River, because there had always been powerful women. There had been Marie Therese, the freed slave. There had been Cammie Henry, the owner of Melrose. Down the road, Kate Chopin had written stories of women's opening up of women in the latter part of the last century. Now, maybe Francois Mignon used to say it was the water and God that made the difference, but for some reason or another, the role of women has been very dominant out in that area. And Clementine also is a dominant female figure in the art, but she also depicts in her paintings women in a very predominant role. Frequently in a painting, even sometimes in a wedding painting, the bride will be bigger than the groom or the minister. Or in the famous painting with the Britton family, she painted Anne Britton much larger than her son, the football player, or her large husband, because Clementine always thought Anne was the most important person in the family because she was the one she was friends with. So Clementine frequently portrayed women in a role that was probably realistic, but also probably not the popular or the most current trend at that time.
Great.
I hadn't talked about that any.
Yeah, no, and because we see that demonstrated in a lot of her paintings, so I think that's real important, her attitude.
We can say something else about that if you want to. I don't know, but
I think that's fine. I think, unless you can think of anything else. That's all my questions.
let me see if I can say something inspirational to end it. She was uneducated. She was poor. She had everything in the world going against her. But yet, she managed, by using a brush and some colors paint, to capture stories that will last forever, and to many people be the only way of knowing what happened in a small part of this world in a fixed period of time. It's a very valuable resource from a person that I personally knew as a miraculous individual.
Great.